Hey everyone, thanks for joining me back here at the Sober Truth Podcast. I am George Wood, the tattooed pastor, and I'm excited because this week we have Pastor Ed Treat. He is the director and founder of the Center of Addiction and Faith, an amazing organization that you get to hear more about. So please, like the video, share the video, and make sure you subscribe to the station to hear more content, to see more content just like this. And please, make some comments, leave them below. Let me know what you think of what we're doing here because I feel alone. I feel lonely. So please comment below. Hey everyone, you are here with George Wood, the tattooed pastor, and the Sober Truth Podcast. And I am just really excited today to be sitting here with Pastor Ed Treat, who I had the opportunity to meet last year. If some of you remember, I went to a conference up in Minnesota with the Center for Addiction and Faith and just had a life transformative time, a time I've spoken about many of times on here, as it was catalyst for me to enter into my sabbatical and make some radical changes in my own life. And I'm finally just now getting around to having this conversation with Pastor Ed, an amazing man who it's just so interesting when we think of recovery and we think of following Jesus, and we can come from totally different backgrounds in totally different parts of the world, but our journeys can be so similar when we fundamentally look at the core of who we are as men, women as well, but just people who are who've struggled with addiction or brokenness, and also want to honor our relationship with God and what it can look like as we try to live this out in our recovery and as examples to those that we lead. And so I'm sitting here with him today, and I can't wait for you all to hear his story and to hear about the amazing work that he's doing. So everyone, this is Pastor Ed Treat. Pastor, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, George. It's an honor to be here. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to share my story because it's really not my story. I'm not the hero of the story. It's God's story, and it's like you said. It's the story. Our stories resonate with one another. We don't do the exact same things, but we have the same feelings along the way, and we struggle with many of the same internal things that all humans struggle with because of the way we were created. We just God made us all that way, and we all have the same kind of internal dynamics. Although some of us experience different things in life that maybe make that internal world a little more challenging than average. It really depends on what you were raised with. I grew up in a family that was I thought was normal growing up, but it wasn't until I later got in recovery, looked back, I realized that my family wasn't all that healthy or normal. Maybe it was normal, but it wasn't all that healthy.
Yeah.
Because I think healthy families are abnormal, really. I mean, there's fewer of them from my experience than we like to think. I think that's probably why Leave It to Beaver was such an interesting thing growing up, because it was such a novel. This normal family was so like, wow, who has that? Right. I didn't have that. I grew up with a dad who was he was a military guy, a career military man, served a couple tours in Vietnam, but he just to explain him a little bit, he grew up in a really hard environment. He grew up in the Grapes of Wrath in not Kansas, but what's just below Kansas? Omaha.
Idaho?
Oklahoma. He grew up in Oklahoma during the Depression, and his family got wiped out, and his dad was an alcoholic, and he just got a really rough life. I mean, you read his autobiography, and it's like, wow, what a different world he experienced. But so he didn't have a lot to work with in terms of what it means to be a father. He was a great provider, but that was where it ended. He was trying to make his way through the military and work his way up through the ranks, and he would come home. We never knew what we were going to get when Dad came home. He was either handing candy out or he was swinging a belt. And more often, he was swinging a belt. So I grew up in an environment where there was always this potential for punishment, and the punishment was severe. I mean, it was a beating, it was a belt, and it was raising welts and sometimes blood. And so the beatings were really severe. It was my dad just acting out his rage on it, taking it out on his children. we had 6 boys, 2 girls in my family, so I was number 6. So the older kids got it worse, and then there's a pecking order, and so we picked on each other. My mom said you have to be nice to each other, and so we found mean ways to be nice. We had sarcasm, and we used to find littlest fault with one another, and so you're always, being picked on, humiliated, shamed. Some kind of flaw would be pointed out and made fun of. And so you tried to stay out of that limelight. So I grew up in that soup of fear and worried about being punished, but also worried about being humiliated and shamed. And so it was a really unhealthy environment. It wasn't loving, wasn't nurturing in the least bit. So when I got to about 12, 13 years old and had my first drink of alcohol, it was just about the best thing ever. I remember that first drink. A friend of mine stole some whiskey from his dad, and we mixed it up with my mom's Pepsi that I stole. Mixed it in a mason jar and drank that, and I just can't even tell you how wonderful that feeling was. It just went down, and I, for the first time in my life, felt good. I felt top of the world. It fixed me. Mm-hmm. And whatever fear or shame or guilt I was living with was gone. I didn't set out to be an addict or an alcoholic, but I just know that worked for me. It healed all my hurts. And so if there was alcohol or drugs around, I wanted it. And so I would make sure that I was around places where the chances were good I'd get some. And I went to all the parties, held many of the parties myself. I sold and bought drugs. In high school, my nickname was Woodstock. I had long hair down to here, and I wore hippie shirts, and I had photograph glasses that turned dark, and I was this wastrel. I was that kid that if your parents saw you with, they would say, "I don't want you hanging out with him." That was me. So I partied my way through high school, barely graduated, and then I moved to Hawaii because I wanted to live somewhere cool and somewhere where the drinking age was lower. So I was able to get into the bars right away. And I lived there for about 3 years. I moved from there because I'd made such a mess of my life that the only option left was to run. So I cut and ran and moved to San Diego, and then I moved to Phoenix. And it was the same story. I would live somewhere until I couldn't pay the rent, or I couldn't lose a job, or that's kind of the way my life would go. It would always just get worse, never better. And it's because I was drinking every night and I was using drugs, and I didn't see the connection there. I just thought I used and drank drugs like normal people do. That's the problem is that when you're in that, you don't know what normal is. And what I was doing I thought was normal, but apparently it wasn't. I lived that way till I was about 27 years old. Throughout those years of my drinking and using drugs, there were many times that I'd hit bottom, and I would think, I got to get right with God. And where do you do that? You go to church. And so I would go try out a church, and I would go into church. I would sit in the back. I'd sit through a service, and I would leave, and I would leave thinking, I don't know how that's helpful. I couldn't see any way that was addressing my issues. Just didn't feel any connection there at all. In fact, not only did I not feel a connection, I felt really out of place. Didn't belong there at all. So I was drawn there, but I didn't fit in there. And I also didn't see that as an answer to what I was struggling with. I knew God was the answer, and I thought God was in church, and I just couldn't seem to find that place. And so I struggled like that until about age 27. My brother went off to treatment, and he got my mom an education about the disease. And so the two of them began to gang up on me. My brother was inviting me to meetings, and I would always say, no, I'm not interested. And I thought he meant he wanted me to go because he needed company. And so I finally said, yes, I would go, just out of pity for him and support. So I went to my first AA meeting, and I was terrified for a couple of reasons. One, I was worried that what if I see someone I know? How are they going to know I'm not one? I didn't want to be affiliated, right? And the other fear I had was as the meeting started, they started going around the table, and I thought, oh my God, I'm going to have to talk. And I was terrified because I heard the way they were talking, and I didn't know that language. I thought, I can't talk like that. And I was so impressed with it. I mean, I was terrified of it, but also very impressed. I thought, these are the most beat-up-looking people I've ever seen. And listen to them talk. They're funny. They're charming. They're at peace with themselves. They're just, they were so genuine and authentic that I just thought, how are they doing that? I wanted that. I thought I'd love to be able to do that, but I was so buried underneath my layers of masks that I didn't even know who I was anymore. And so I lived in fear of exposure. That I was going to be somebody would be able to see me for who I was. And after that first meeting, a guy I went to high school with came up to me. And he said, "Hey, Ed, good thing you made it here, man. You look like shit." And I was like, what? That really got through. My brother apologized all the way home. But I was like, oh my gosh, that I look like one of them. One of them that I thought looked like shit, telling me that that really shook me up. I spent the next year of my life trying to convince myself that they were wrong and that I didn't have this problem. Because they were all talking to me like I was a newcomer and that I knew what I needed to do. And I was like, I wanted to stop the meeting and say, no, I'm here for my brother. I don't have this problem.
Yeah.
And that's the crazy part is I really didn't think I did. It wasn't that I knew I had a problem and was denying it. I really didn't think I had this problem. I knew I had a problem. I knew my life wasn't going the way it should be going. There was something wrong with me. And if I could fix that thing that was wrong with me, I would drink and use drugs like normal people do. Yeah. Or as my friend Chris used to say, I would shoot drugs like normal people. Right?
Yep.
So I fought for about a year before I finally called home and I said, I need help. And my mom said, well, let's get you into treatment. And I said, no, I don't think that's my problem. I know that's what you think, but I think there's something wrong with me and I'd like to find out what that is. She said, all right, we'll get you home and we'll figure it out. So they called the next day with a plan, and meanwhile they'd gone to an Al-Anon meeting, and the people at Al-Anon said, no, don't rescue him. Tell him where the treatment center is and get him a bed there and line it up for him. And so that's what they did. They called and said, we have a bed for you. They're expecting you. And I was just like, what? You're not going to save me? And I got off the phone, and I had a decision to make. And I thought, what the heck? I might as well give it a try. What can I lose? I went into treatment, still thinking this wasn't my problem. And I read the big book. I watched the Chalk Talk videos from Father Martin. And light bulbs started to go off. I thought, my God, this explains everything. This is my problem. I mean, it really, from that day on, 1986, the compulsion to use had left me, and I was free from that. But that's not to say I live happily ever after. It's sort of just the start of my journey. And so the compulsion to use was gone, but then I find myself, I'm 27 years old, and I'm facing life clean and sober, and I don't have the tools for it. I don't have the capacity to deal with life. That's because, when I was a kid, they used to say, if you drink and use drugs, it'll stunt your growth. We used to laugh at that. But here I was, 27, and I had the mental and emotional capacity of a 13-year-old. Mm-hmm. And so I was trying to face life without the tools. And so that's where the 12-step program and working a program of recovery has slowly over time equipped me to grow up and to become an adult. I'm not sure I'm there yet, but it's hard because all of that crap for 13 years and all that childhood stuff remains with me. I mean, when you do stuff, it stays in you until you resolve it. And I found that out from the death of my sister. When she died, I was age 14, she was 19, and she died. And I was 29 years old, and I went through a workshop, and it turns out that I had not grieved my sister. And that grief had been in there for 12 years, just waiting to come out, and I'd been suppressing it. And so I think, well, that grief was in there. What about all the childhood trauma and all the other stuff that I grew up with? That's all got to be resolved. And that's what happens through the process of recovery is you get to clean up the past. Because what I love about the 12 steps is it's really, after becoming a pastor, I'm able to compare my Christian faith to the 12-step. And really, the 12 steps is the liturgy of the Christian life. It's trusting and surrendering to God completely. It's examining your life and changing some of your habits, behaviors, attitudes. It's cleaning up your past, making amends for the things you've done wrong and said. It's prayer and meditation and an ongoing self-evaluation, and it's carrying the message to others who still suffer. So that's sort of the dance that Christians are expected to do, but the program teaches that in a very practical way. And I think that's one of the shortfallings of my faith tradition is they say, yeah, you're saved by grace, as though that's all that you need to hear. That is really great news. But what do I do in the meantime? I know I'm saved, I'm loved by God, but I'm still broken. How do I get well? And the church really doesn't have an answer for that. That's really helpful to people who've been really hurt. So I've been grateful for the 12-step programs that have given me my life back. For 37 years now, I've been practicing, and I continue to go to three meetings a week and still working on myself. It's funny, going through COVID has been traumatic for all of us, and it has stirred up for me some of my trauma that after 37 years of recovery, I'm still resolving trauma from the past. And I believe underneath every addiction, there's unresolved pain. We like to think, the culture likes to think that addicts are bad people doing a bad thing, but really it's just hurting people trying to fix pain. And it doesn't matter what the addiction is. It's drugs, it could be alcohol, it could be work, it could be exercise, it could be pornography, it could be codependency, it can be, we get addicted to all kinds of stuff. And underneath that addiction is unresolved pain. We do unhealthy things to try to fix hurts that are inside. In my faith tradition, we say at the beginning of worship, we have this corporate confession, and we say, we confess that we are in bondage to sin and cannot free ourselves. That's the exact words that come out of our Lutheran book of worship. We're in bondage to sin and we cannot free ourselves. So we're saying to God, I keep saying and doing and thinking things that I know are hurtful and are wrong, and I can't seem to stop. And that's a confession of addiction, really. And so, so we all have it to some degree. It's just for some of us who've, were brought up in the best circumstances, it's a little bit worse. So I don't have the worst addiction problem in the world. There's people with a lot worse than me, but mine's bad enough for me.
I don't need the worst.
I don't need the worst.
It's funny. Now, let me jump in there. Now, when did you grow? Was your home a Christian home?
Yes, we grew up. We're a Catholic family. That's why there were so many of us. And Catholics do evangelism in the bedroom.
Right. You build your congregation.
That's right. We need more members. Go make more members. So we were Catholic, and we followed the basic rubrics of Catholicism. Go to church on Christmas and Easter, get your first communion, get your catechism, and get your confirmation, and then you're done.
Yeah, you're good.
You're good. And so it was Catholic upbringing. We were very dedicated to going to church every Sunday, but it wasn't a lived faith of any kind.
So how'd you make now I should let people know you're up in Minnesota.
Yep.
Now, so because you named off like the cool places like Hawaii.
Yeah.
Now you're in the coolest place, Minnesota, where it's
that's right.
It's cold.
It's cold. I'm doing penance. I'm doing penance for my sin.
Right. Now, Minnesota happens to be a very Lutheran area. How'd you end up up until 27? What did you do for work?
I was in the restaurant business. I worked, as a waiter, a cook, whatever jobs.
Super healthy for alcoholics.
Oh yeah, yes, it's a great environment.
Great environment.
Yeah.
Okay, so you get sober, and then you make the leap to becoming a Lutheran pastor.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit of that journey.
Yeah, well, I always say that I ended up where I am in life because of my laziness. I've always avoided work. So when I got into recovery, a couple of friends of mine had just gotten into recovery. And so that was really helpful to have two good friends in recovery with me. And they had me, they said I could live with them and that I didn't have to pay rent, and they'd let me just stay in one of the rooms. And then they got tired of that and said, you need to get a job. And I was like, I don't want to get a job for what I'm qualified to do. And so I was really struggling with that. And somebody said, go to college. You can get free money and all the girls you want to meet. So that was my motivations, was free money and girls.
Okay.
So I went to college.
Quite the motivation.
Yeah, well, it was actually. So I got grants to go to college, and it's amazing that when you want to improve your life, there are a lot of hands out there ready to help you up. And I got I used a lot of resources provided by the state, federal government that gave me money and gave me an education and helped me really quite a bit. So I went back to college, and I found out I really was a good student. Those teachers in high school were right. If I applied myself, I was, I could do really well. And I got A's on everything and really loved it. And I was working on a degree in journalism. And in my recovery, I decided I wanted to deepen my relationship with God because the 12-step meetings were great, but I felt like I wanted something more. So where does one go get more of God? You go to church. And so I would go to church, and I began to church hop like I bar hopped. And I kept walking away from churches going, I don't see any connection here with my life and with what these people are doing. And so I struggled with that for a long time, tried many churches, and then a sponsor just said, why don't you just make the program your church? And I did. I just said, okay, I'll just make 12-step program my church. But I never felt really that good about it. There was something missing. And then in my junior year of college, a friend and I from the program said, let's go find God for spring break. And we said, God's probably in the wilderness. Let's go into the wilderness and find God. So we got out a map of Washington State, and in the upper left-hand corner, there's this huge section of green space with no roads going into it. And it's the North Cascades National Forest. And we said, that's where we got to go. We got to get in the middle of there, and we'll find God. Of course, we're joking, but not really. So we get on this boat. The only way to get in there is to take this boat up this long, 60-mile-long lake, and they drop you off and pick you up days later. And so you're in the middle of the wilderness. So we get on this boat. We're chugging up the lake, and then the boat makes a stop, and about 50 people get on the boat. And we're like, oh no, we want to be alone up there in the wilderness so we can find God, and we can't have all these people. So I said, are you guys going to Stehekin? And they said, no, we're going to Holden Village. Well, Holden Village wasn't on our map, but it was a mining town, a copper mine town that went out of business, and then they sold it to the Lutheran Church, and Lutherans turned it into an adult retreat center. And it's incredibly remote. You can't. There's no phone lines going in. They generate their own electricity. They have their own zip code. I mean, it's in the middle of nowhere. Wow. Really remote. And so they said, no, we're going to this Lutheran camp up in the mountains. I didn't know anything about Lutherans, and I just said, I just had this thought. I thought, oh great, I'm on a boatload of happy Christians, because I had kind of concluded that Christians were people that walked around pretending like everything was great. You put a smile on your face, and you say, praise the Lord. And so I thought, oh, great, I'm on a boatload of happy Christians. And it wasn't until later that I found out that Lutherans really aren't all that happy. They are, I don't know, the theology allows you to be human and broken. And it was a really good fit for me because, so I got to learn about Lutherans, but here I am. Oh, so I'm on a boatload of happy Christians, and I said, are you guys going to Stehekin? And they said, no, Holden. And I said, what's Holden? They told me. And then one lady said, well, show them the flyer. So one lady pulls this wrinkled flyer out of her purse, holds it up, and it says 12-step workshop weekend at Holden Village. I'm on a boatload of people in recovery going for a recovery weekend. And we're trying to get it as far into the wilderness as possible to find God, and that's who we're with. I mean, it was just unbelievable. I thought, oh, if this isn't God at work, I don't know what is.
Right.
So they say, come with us. You know about this stuff. Come with us. And we said, okay. So we went to Holden with these people. And it was like coming home for me. Here was the church and here was my recovery all in one place. And I thought, oh, I finally found it. And that's how I ended up becoming a Lutheran. And got involved at Holden Village. I worked there for a summer. I met my wife. She came out from Minnesota. And you wondered how I got to Minnesota. And what the Lutheran Church does, how they do evangelism, is they send their Lutheran daughters out to find wayward Catholic boys and bring them into the church. So I met my wife there, and it was there that I decided to go to seminary. I thought these Lutherans are okay. I want to go study God and grow in spirituality and go to seminary. So I enrolled at seminary, and we got married, and we moved to Minnesota, and I went to seminary. About 3 months in, I started taking classes, and I came home one day to my wife, and I said, I have made an enormous mistake. I said, the Lutheran Church is not Holden Village. Holden Village is really progressive and open-minded and inclusive, and what I found at seminary was just really like every other church. They weren't talking about brokenness. They weren't talking about the 12 steps. They weren't talking about spirituality and how to grow spiritually. It was all academic. It was all head, study, brain, head stuff. And I was just so crushed by that. I just thought, what am I going to do? I'm in the wrong place. And just about that time, I heard about some pastors getting together to meet for the first time. They were all alcoholics. And I thought, alcoholic pastors, I got to go. So I drove to Chicago, and I walked in, and here were these pastors telling their stories, their first step stories. And it was again like coming home. I thought, these are my people. And so I felt renewed in my call, and I thought, well, I can be a pastor and be in recovery. And so that sort of renewed me. So that's the short answer to your question.
But you became a Lutheran pastor, and you actually, and how long were you working as a Lutheran pastor?
So I was ordained in 1995, and I just left my church in 2020. Is that right? Yeah. So 25 years in parish ministry. And when I joined that group of pastors getting together for the first time, they became a 501c3, and they formed a group called the Fellowship of Recovering Lutheran Clergy. Because back in 1990, when they formed, pastors, if they had a problem with alcohol, they got thrown away. It just wasn't something it wasn't a problem you could have because of the stigma. And so this group formed to say, no, pastors are people too, and they have problems like everybody else, and if they have a drinking problem, it's a health issue, and we should treat it as such. And so we became an advocate for pastors in the church, and that's what the FRLC has been doing for 30 years. And so I've been their director for the last 18 years. So we have an annual retreat. We have an impaired professionals policy that helps to guide bishops in how to handle a pastor with a problem. And we wrote a book, and we have a few resources. Just a small ministry, but it's doing some really great things.
And so now let's transition over to the center, which. Yep. So you're pastoring and you decide you want to, stop the congregation because you wanted to make the leap. Tell us a little bit about that part of the journey.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so the FRLC, the Fellowship Recovering Lutheran Clergy, of which I'm the director, I said we should start a fellowship for Lutherans who aren't clergy, because there might be a few Lutherans with a recovery problem or an addiction problem. And about that time, this is in 2016, I went to a presentation at the University of Minnesota, and I heard Amy Klobuchar, the senator, speak about the opioid problem. And she said that they're doing everything they can within their powers to try to fix this problem, but it's getting worse. And the reason it's getting worse is what they can change are the laws, and they can make it harder for people to get opioids. But that means people are then turning to the streets to get opioids, and those are the opioids that are killing people. And so she said, what we're doing to fix the problem is making the problem more people are dying. She said, we need everyone to step up and realize this is everyone's problem. And that's when I had an epiphany. I thought, there's a church on every corner of every town in this country, and hardly any of them are doing a thing about addiction. What if churches began to do something? What if they began to talk about it and to have a brochure in their narthex and to get educated on the issues so that people like me, when they come in looking for help, can find something, even if it's just a brochure. And so the FRLC agreed with me, and so we put on a conference and hosted it here in Minneapolis. In 2018, we had our first one. We thought we brought together the smartest people we could find to talk about addiction, people who are doing some really good work in this field, and then we knew that our colleagues didn't get any education about addiction while at seminary, because it's briefly touched on in pastoral care classes, but it's like one afternoon for an hour. Mm-hmm. And so pastors that are not educated about addiction, even though it's the number one health crisis in the country right now. So we thought, let's educate our fellow pastors about this problem. So that was what the conference was for. We thought we'd maybe get 30, 40, 50 local pastors to show up. We had to cut off registration at 200 for that first conference. They came from 34 different states and 17 different denominations. And it blew our hair back. It was just unbelievable. We couldn't believe that kind of a response. And it was a mountaintop conference. There were people that had similar experiences to what you described having. And so we just came out of that conference and said, we need to keep doing this. And so we did it again in 2019, and we had a similar result. And then the people around me, the FRLC and other people that I love and trust, said, you need to make this a ministry, because this is a big problem, and you're onto something here. And so I said, yeah, but I have a job, and this is a lot of work. And so I had to begin the struggle of what do I do? And so I tried to work it out with my congregation where I could, develop the Center of Addiction and Faith and be a senior pastor at the same time. But it was too much. It was just too much. And I kept praying for some direction from God. And really what I was praying for was, God, show me the money. Show me how I can leave this job and do this other one and still get paid, because I need to eat. And so what I heard back from God was, just do this new thing, and we'll figure out the money later.
Yeah.
And so I took the big step of faith. I left the church, resigned in 2020, and right when I resigned, and I had I was going to go out and share my work with the world, COVID hit.
Yeah.
And I was like, God, why have you brought us out into the wilderness to kill us? So I was just really devastated. I thought, what am I going to do? And then Tim King said, hey, well, let's do a webinar. And then realized that because of COVID, everybody has learned to do Zoom. And so now we can gather people in a way that I could never have gathered them before. And so we're doing webinars now. I'm doing a podcast and interviewing other pastors on their recovery stories. We host a number of recovery groups, 12-step groups. And what's lovely about that is the places most hungry for resources and support are rural areas. They have no access to all that we have in urban areas. Now they can access that. I mean, we have pastors in like Kansas, in the middle of nowhere, who can now get to a 12-step meeting. One pastor I know who's an overeater says his nearest meeting is 2 hours away. He says, but now he can come to a meeting every week and get the support he needs. And so that's incredibly meaningful for me that we can provide that. So we're hosting meetings for veterans, LGBTQ. We even have a link to meetings for Muslims. We have a meeting for clergy only. We have a meeting for churchgoers, people who want to be able to talk about their faith, because usually in 12-step groups you're asked not to talk about your faith. And so we're doing that, and we got a bunch of other resources besides that. So I've got more ideas than I know what to do with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's exciting.
I can relate to that. It is. It is. I think one of the things that was so surprising to me, and our stories are so similar all the way down the line, including the Catholic part. But
oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I did the whole Catholic thing. But when I started the Sober Truth Project, it's basically what you're doing with the Center of Addiction and Faith. That was my mindset and what I wanted to do. What I didn't know until I went to the conference, and you probably did, but I never realized there's such a divide between the Lutheran, the typical Protestant mainline churches, and then I guess more the Pentecostal revival style, right? Like everybody loved me and embraced me up there, but it was definitely, they were like, wow, you're normal like us. And it was like, but I get where they were coming from. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I meant that in like, I'm in the South for one. Okay. I'm in the inner city in the South. And so my wife and I are actually going, we loved the Lutheran church so much that's actually where we're going on Sunday for Easter. So it really did have an impact on us. The inclusiveness and I loved it. We both loved it. But I didn't realize so I'm trying to do this similar thing with more the style of churches that we have down here, and there's nobody trying to do what I do. So a lot of people know me as the recovery pastor, and I know a lot of the main, the more larger congregations down here, they'll turn to me for advice on addiction and mental health, because there isn't anybody that's really trying to welcome those that are struggling with addiction, because a lot of our faith this style of faith has been a lot of name it and claim it. And, don't, right. And which is typical in a lot of styles of faith. I'm not saying that negatively about the revival style, but it's that name it and claim it thing is pushed a lot of people that are struggling into the corner, into the dark. And, right. And then eventually right out the door and away from God altogether, because they did try to name it and claim it, and it didn't work.
Yeah.
I often say I've done hundreds of altar calls that didn't work. So, but it is interesting seeing, I love what you guys are doing. What were some of your challenges when you were still pastoring, working with people in your congregation that struggled with addiction? What were some of the challenges? Because how do you help a family or whatever when you're walking alongside them? Yep.
Well, after that episode with feeling like I had made a big mistake in meeting these other pastors in recovery, I thought, well, I can be a pastor who helps people with addiction problems. That can be my specialty. And so I thought that's what I would do going in. And so I've always been really open about my recovery. In fact, I put it in my paperwork when I sought my first call, and went out to Nebraska for my first church interview. And the guy that was chair of the call committee they were going to interview me for the job as pastor. He pulled me aside and he showed me the paperwork, and it said that I was a member of AA and I was a member of the Fellowship of Recovering Losing Clergy. And he said, "What do you want me to do about this? Somehow we have to explain this." And I said, "Well, just have me talk about myself and I'll explain it." And he said, "Okay." So we go in, there's 12 people sitting around a table, and he says, "Pastor, tell us about yourself." So I told him the story that I just shared with you guys. And when I got done, he said, "Oh, I didn't introduce everybody else around the table." And so they began to go around the table, and each one of them began to divulge some kind of a struggle that they've had in their life. And it wasn't, alcohol and drugs always, but it was divorce, and it was cancer, and there was the death of a loved one. And it was like, we got done, and somebody said, "I didn't know that all of you had these kinds of struggles." And somebody else just said, "What just happened here?" And it was like a little 12-step meeting. And I thought, that's a gift. That's a gift that recovering people have to give to the church, is that language of being authentic and genuine. And when one person starts doing that, it's catchy, because people are dying to talk about their hurts. And I can't even remember what your original question was. What?
Well, no, but that's a beautiful thing. Like, that's how you sort of got your start.
Yeah.
In your first call, and that is important, because that was actually one of my next questions was, what are some of the challenges as being a Lutheran pastor? You walk, because your style is a little bit different. A lot of people in more the revival style, they start their own church. But as a Lutheran, you get a call, right? You get a call,
Yes.
and you go to it. You get moved to some city, and you're like now the new pastor for a while.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, each time you got to say, "Hi, I'm in recovery."
Yeah.
Was that a challenge?
Well, it wasn't for me, because I was really comfortable with it. And I didn't have a problem with that. In fact, the bishop called me before. He said, "You don't have to put that in your paperwork. That's personal to you." He said, that's none of their business. And he was trying to, I think he knew that if I had it in my paperwork, I probably wouldn't get the job. And I think he was trying to protect me. But I just said, no, I'm pretty open about it. So I don't want, if they don't want that, then I don't want them, So I said, But I know for a lot of pastors, it is a little more challenging to being open. It's scary, but for some reason it hasn't been for me.
You went into it, I think. I think you began. You started. Yeah. I think it's a lot harder for people that are a pastor, and then their addiction comes out.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and that's for whom it's harder. I agree. But so you'd asked about, how does this work as a pastor? How do I help people in recovery as a pastor?
How were you back when you were running a congregation? How was it?
Well, that was the surprise. I thought I could be a pastor to help people. And what I found is that addicts, alcoholics, even though they knew I was in recovery, if they were active in their disease, they didn't want to talk to me. They wouldn't come to me for anything. In fact, they'd avoid me. But what I did find that where I could be helpful is the people that loved them when they heard that I was in recovery. If they had a loved one struggling, they would come to me and they would ask for my help. And that's where I could be helpful. The problem is that most of the times they would come to me and say, "Hey, I want you to go fix him."
Oh, yeah.
And would you go talk to him? And I said, well, if he wants to come talk to me, yes, but I don't chase alcoholics. And if he wants to talk to me, yes, but here's what you can do to help him. You can go to a meeting and get an education and learn what it is that he's going through and how it is that you're helping with that. Anyway, so, but then their response would almost always be, "But it's not my problem. Why do I need to get help?" And it's like, because it's somebody you love and you should go do whatever it takes. Anyway, so that's when I realized that the church was full of really bad codependents. People who love people to a fault, and so I thought. So for the longest time, I thought, my call in life is to get recovering people into church so they can know the blessing of the gospel, and so I that's what I pursued for many years. But then it finally dawned on me, I don't need to get recovering people into the church. I need to get church people into recovery. Because they're the ones. The recovering people are doing great. They're going to meetings. They're sharing their hearts. They're 12-step meetings is some of the most spiritual places I've ever been. It's church people that need to learn to open up and share their hurts and to admit their brokenness. We're all broken, and if the church isn't a place where we can talk about that, then church has got a serious problem.
What advice would you give to, let's say, a pastor who doesn't have a background in any of this and wants to know how to help people and help his congregation better? What's some advice that you would give them?
Yeah, there's some really good books out there. There's some trainings that can. We just had a clergy training, a core competency training that we offer through the Center of Addiction and Faith. And so I would say learn everything you can about it. We have on our website and on our phone app, we have a list of curated books that we recommend people read. Pastors are typically readers of books. Yours is a book I would recommend. And so I say, educate yourself, because these are very educated people, and they just need to know what they're dealing with. Most pastors I know are dealing with some type of addiction. Probably the biggest ones for pastors is workaholism. They get paid to work too much. And when I mean paid, what I mean is they get rewarded for working too much. In fact, if you're a pastor and you don't work too much, you get assaulted, because people just really expect you to work 7 days a week. And if you don't, then they get on your case. So workaholism is a big issue for pastors, and overeating. If you notice, there's pastors, at least in my denomination, are rather large, many of them, and they have they eat their emotions, and so they have food addictions. Yeah.
That's good. And now, what would you give to, you touched on it a little bit before about, helping, the family, but what do you do for resources in Minnesota? Like in Tampa here, we have a lot of different rehabs and programs and recovery places. How do you have a lot of resources that you utilize up there?
I had no idea how many resources were here until I started doing that work full time. And I started going to conferences and exhibiting for the Center of Addiction and Faith and meeting some of the other people in this field. There are so many resources, I can't even begin to count them. They're just counseling, therapy, treatment centers for every kind of addiction under the sun. They say Minnesota is the land of 10,000 treatment centers. We
really?
have them on, because, Hazelden started here, and they have just exploded here. So, but I bet there's more resources in your community than you ever knew. Once you start digging into it, there's a help finder on our phone app and on our website that you can put in your city. You can put in your state, then your city, wow. And it'll list all the resources available.
Wow!
And so it depends on what you're looking for. You can dial down to eating disorder. You can dial down to addiction, drug addiction, or alcoholism, or whatever you're dealing with. And it'll help you find a treatment center. It'll help you find a therapist or a counselor, whatever your mental health issue is. That's
on the app?
That is on the app. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
If you go to your phone app, what city are you in?
Tampa.
In Tampa. Let's see. Find help. There's a link. What's your zip code?
33605.
So I'm plugging that in. Drug, alcohol, rehab centers, counseling, and support. And you've got a New Season Treatment Center. You've probably heard of that one. River Oaks, Riverside, Recovery of Tampa, Tampa Metro Treatment, Operation PAR, Cove Behavioral Health, Bay Area Treatment. I mean, the list just goes on and on.
Wow. And that's, so just so everybody knows, so the Center for Addiction and Faith has their own app, and that's where Pastor Ed is going right now. You download their app. It has a ton of resources, and one of which it has a help finder. That I did not know that.
Yeah.
I can tell you, I personally have been in and out of a couple of those recovery centers. My first detox was Operation PAR. I got my first 45 days sober there. So, but anyways, so you can go
That's
right to that.
That's your alma mater.
It's my alma mater. In a way, it is. Every time I hear Operation PAR, I'm like, oh yeah, those are the days. But that's pretty amazing. So wherever you are listening to this podcast, download that app for the Center for Addiction and Faith, because that resource alone is worth it.
Yeah. Well, we designed
really
this with caregivers in mind so that they could have resources at their fingertips.
Wow.
So if a pastor...
how did you get all that out? How did you get it all?
Well, I steal everything. I'm a thief.
That's the best way.
That's right. I don't have to. I told you I'm lazy. I don't want to create anything. I find what somebody else is doing and I confiscate it.
That's a beautiful thing. Don't reinvent the wheel.
That's right.
Just make it roll better.
That's right. That's right. That Help Finder is from, I believe it's from Psychology Today. Oh, wow. No, it's from an organization called, I used to have one on here from Psychology Today, but I switched to this one because it's a better one. It's called Start Your Recovery. So they're cited on the app. So the app just gets you to that, to their to their resource. So yeah, if you go to your app store, it's free and it's called, just look for Center of Addiction and Faith. You can download it. There's some sermons on there if you're looking to plan a worship service and for pastors if they're want some ideas on how to do it. It has all the webinars. It has all the presentations from our last year's conference that you were at. They're on there if you want to watch some of those again.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
You might even be in some of those scenes.
Oh. Well, then, I am a narcissist, so if I can feed myself, I might actually
That's right.
tune into that. Just catch a glimpse of myself.
Yeah.
That actually, I spoke. So Timothy King was on here the other day, which was something interesting. I didn't realize he took his wife's name in the marriage. I thought that was pretty funny.
Did he? I didn't know that.
Name. Yes. He's like, yeah, I did that. I married her, and her name is So, anyways,
but I thought because he wanted to be royalty.
I know it sounds that way, but. He actually, Timothy King was on the last episode, and he's a big part of the organization. Yeah. And how did you guys meet?
Oh, he came to one of the conferences, and he I think he came to 2019, and approached me and said, "This is really great." And I read his book, and I invited him back as a speaker. And so he was in our 2022 speaker, and then he became a member of the board.
Yeah. Great guy.
Yeah, he's amazing. He's one of the brightest minds I know. I mean, he does his homework. He's really well versed on so many topics. He's got a lot of depth. I just know a tiny bit about a lot. He knows a lot about a lot.
I'm more in your camp, I'm with you. So, tell us a little bit about the upcoming conference that the center has, and any other webinars or anything that we should know about that's coming up.
Yeah, we just had a webinar with Caroline Beidler. And she just wrote a book called The Downstairs Church. That's on our website and on our app, that webinar. But she wrote a book about finding grace in the basement of the church, going to the 12-step meetings. So she's singing a little bit of that language about my own struggle of why can't I find help in the church? And so she talks about that marriage for her between the downstairs church and the upstairs church. And then Andy Partington is going to be our guest for our next webinar coming up later this month. In April, and Tim is the one Tim King does our webinars, so he's our host. I just come on and do a welcome and hand it over to him. But Andy Partington has an organization called Novo, and I'm anxious to learn more about it. I don't know that much, but he uses adventures in his model for recovery. I wish I'd have known about that when I got into recovery. I went to a very boring place. He takes these people on these adventures, and they find recovery. That's as much as I know about it. And then our conference is October 5 through 7 this year. We do have one of our speakers is, I have the hardest time remembering names. This is why I'm not a good salesperson. I can't remember stuff. I can't remember her name, but she's really good. She's the head of the organization called End It for Good, and I hope she doesn't see this podcast because it's embarrassing when you can't remember somebody's name. It's just blanket on me for some reason. But she tells a story about she grew up in the Bible Belt, and her faith is more evangelical, like you described where you're at. And she said that she was a foster mom for a woman whose child was taken away from her because of her drug use. And she had some really, based on her religious faith, she had some really judgmental attitudes toward this mom until she got to know her and understood what she was dealing with. And it was transformative for her, and she realized that, these aren't bad people, but they're hurting people, and instead of being judgmental, compassion. And that's the theme of our conference coming up is addiction and compassion. And we're going to be focusing a lot on how we think of addicts as broken people who need our help rather than bad people who need our judgment.
So if you can make it to the conference, I highly recommend it. I'm going to be there, so I wouldn't miss it. It's a really can be a transformative time. And, for most of my listeners, you'd probably be stepping outside of what you're used to. And I think that is always a good thing to do. Always. I went down that road too, as part of my journey of trying to find God who would help me. And I went the evangelical route as well. I went to Pentecostal churches and I tried speaking in tongues and that was all part of my journey, trying to find a church that could help me. And I just found it amazing that I ended up in a 12-step program, which I thought, I didn't need because I had Jesus. If I had Jesus, why would I need a 12-step program? But I ended up in a 12-step program, and that's where I got well. And I just thought, how is it I'm in all these churches saying, Jesus, help me, Jesus, help me. And I end up in a program that says, God as you understand God, and there's no name Jesus in there. That really messed up my faith. Because I really began the journey to saying, you know what, I don't know that God is that worried about the name so much as he is about compassion. Amen.
So I that was a challenge for me. And then I know you probably need to wrap up the show here. Just one more quick story. I had a sponsor who was working with me, and he just one day he just said, tell me about God. And I went, what? And he says, tell me about the God you believe in. So I said, well, I never had that question before. It was a little challenging. And so I started telling him what I thought about God. And he said, I don't think that's God. And I went, what are you talking about? Of course that's God. And he said, no, I don't think it is. And I said, well, what the hell are you talking about? And he said, it sounds to me a lot like your dad.
Yeah.
And I just went, holy crap. Yeah. And I went, oh, my God, it is. It's a bigger version of my dad. And my dad's kind of an asshole. And I just went, what do I do with this? And he said, well, write him a letter and let him go. Fire him. And I was like, what? And so I did. I went home and I spent a couple of days writing. And the more I wrote, the madder I got, the more I wrote. And I wrote this very angry letter because I felt I'd been so deceived by this false God. Because it wasn't God. It was a God of my own creation and a projection of my father. And I thought, well, where else are we going to get our God images but from earthly experiences? And so I think it's pretty common that people do that they project onto God, their parents. And the hard part was like, well, what do I do? So I brought the letter, I read it to my sponsor, and then we burned it and gave it up. And I said, what do I do now? I don't have a God. He said, well, just let it happen. And so that was the most transformative thing I've ever done, was firing God, false God.
That is such a beautiful story, because that's something that all Christians need to hear. Because there is Christians totally, it's got nothing to do with the addiction part. There's just a lot of Christians that have created gods in either their parents' image or their own image, and it's not God. And it's, this is what I find interesting in sort of my role in trying to bring faith and recovery together, is I'm friends with Greek Orthodox priest, Catholic priest, Anglican, Lutheran, Methodist, and when you get those that are not steeped in their dogma, that really are about God, right? Those that can separate themselves from the dogma of whatever creed or whatever they're, assigned to.
Yes.
You find heart and compassion of people that are really authentically following God. And those people usually don't care what branch or division or whatever you're in.
Yeah.
It's separate. It's when people have created an image of a God that is somehow, whether it's their parents or themselves, but it's not God. And it's like we all have our own way of pursuing God. And I'm not saying anything there's definitely biblical truths such as today being Good Friday and the crucifixion and the resurrection in a couple days. Not taking away those things. I just mean the dogma that can surround denominations and creeds. And a lot of times it's things that have nothing to do with who God actually is.
That's right.
And you don't really become all that, and I say this a lot, but the verse that scares me the most is when Jesus says, "Away from me, for I did not know you." And I think there's a lot of times that we, in our effort to look Christian and to look like we have it together, we totally miss God. We don't show our true self to God. And we miss who God really is. And that is so sad. I don't want to be 70 or 80 or on my deathbed and realize that I spent 40 years acting like a Christian but never knew God. I don't want to do that. I don't want to. That's the same as like waking up one day and realizing you wasted your life. Like, why would you fake being a Christian? Get to know God, really, who he is. Not the dogma that surrounds so many things.
Yeah. You speak so well. I love the way you just can articulate things. And how else are we going to imagine God except for to create God from earthly images, which is whatever you do, however you imagine God, you're reducing God. Because God's bigger than anything we can conceive of, right? So you have to be really careful with that stuff. But I also find that stuff, once it's in there, it's really hard to loosen, to get out. I still find myself reacting to it from my old way of thinking about God. That still rears its head once in a while. Something will happen. I'll go, "Oh, come on, God, give me a break." And it's like, "Oh, that's right. I don't think God does stuff like that's not anyway." But you still kind of think of God in some old ways that I know that I don't really believe anymore. But it's still there.
But now you recognize it.
Yeah.
And now you can recognize it, and you can be like, okay, now we all have things we can work on, right? And so we know there's still some stuff in there. Yeah. Pastor Ed, thank you so much, man. This has been just awesome. I just love you. I love what you do. I just love the ground that you've broke for so many, and we need more of that. And I really hope to be collaborating with you more moving forward. And I will collaborate with you any way you'll let me. So
okay. Well, I want to get your show on our website.
Yeah, please.
So let's make a point of doing that.
Yeah, you just tell me what you need. And Tim actually asked me if I would come and do a webinar, and I'm hoping he meant it, because I would love it. So,
yep. Yeah, that'd be good.
All right, you have a really, tell your wife we said hello. Julie motioned to me.
Say hi to Julie. Hi, Julie.
I will. Yeah, and we love you guys, and hopefully we'll speak soon. But you have a great resurrection.
Thank you, George.
Weekend.
Thank you. God bless you.
God bless you, brother. He is. Well, in a couple days.
In a couple days.
All right. You have a great one, man.
All right. You too.
All right. Thanks for tuning in to the Sober Truth Podcast, and I hope you enjoyed it. Please make sure you leave a comment below, subscribe, like the video, and tune in next week, as I'm sure we'll have something that is mind-blowing for you. And don't forget, Sober Truth Podcast, where faith meets recovery.